Hello, and welcome to the Sleep Library. Wherever you are in the world, and whatever time it is as you press play, we're honored to keep you company as you drift into rest. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to settle in. Feel the warmth of your blanket, the stillness around you, and the space you've made to simply let go. If you enjoy this experience, we invite you to subscribe to the Sleep Library. We create gentle, slow, and calming stories to help you sleep. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. And in the comments below, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Your words help us build a global, restful little community. One quiet listener at a time. Now, if you're ready, let's travel back to a time not often remembered, to a village where the wind listened and whispered back. Before the spoon ever found its way to royal tables, before it passed between trembling fingers and noble lips, it began in silence, in the low glow of an ancient Florentine workshop. It is the year 1342, in the heart of Florence's artisan quarter. Narrow alleys wound between stone buildings, their windows shuttered tight against the wind. The night air smells of iron and smoke, cloves and lye. Most of the city sleeps, but one room is alive with fire. Inside, a man works alone. He is not a mere potter. His fingers do not shape clay without thought. He is an alchemist, a man caught somewhere between science and magic, between faith and doubt. His name is lost to time, but his creation remains. Spread across the heavy wooden table are tools older than himself. A pestle worn smooth with use, a bowl of powdered bone, shards of broken porcelain, a small vial of crushed sapphire, impossibly expensive, stolen, or gifted. No one knows. And in the center, a lump of fine kaolin clay, pale as moonlight. He does not speak. The alchemist works by instinct. He has shaped bowls, chalices, even beads for saints' relics. But tonight his hands tremble with a different purpose. He is not making something useful. He is making something delicate, protective, dangerous, a spoon. Not just any spoon. It will be small, graceful, a handle curved just so. Its bowl shallow, meant for tasting, not for filling. This spoon is not made for hunger. It is made for safety. He believes, or perhaps only hopes, that the glaze he has mixed will react when it touches poison. History to begin watching. At the subtle shimmer of crushed sapphire, when fused in flame, might hold some ancient alchemical truth, that it might warn its owner of betrayal. No one asked him to do this, and yet here he is, alone, whispering to clay. He shapes it slowly, with reverence, the way a sculptor might shape a child's face. He smooths the handle, curves the neck, traces a tiny etching into the underside, a symbol of a lily crossed with a blade. His mark, a maker's signature, or a ward. Then the spoon is left to dry, its pale surface still soft and fragile like unfired bone. He waits. For 3 days the spoon rests in his workshop, and then just before the next full moon, he opens the kill. This is not the first spoon he has fired, but it is the only one he has prayed over. The fire consumes everything, doubt, fear, moisture, air. It hardens the clay, binds the glaze, sings the spoon into existence. When he opens the door, the workshop is filled with golden heat. The spoon emerges, gleaming, perfect, delicate. But there's more. The glaze has worked. It is faint, almost imperceptible. But under the candle light, a shimmer runs along the handle like a ripple of water, a soft, bluish gleam. Not just beautiful, mysterious, like something waiting to speak. The alchemist places it on a velvet cloth. He watches the spoon, and the spoon watches him. It does not move, of course. It is porcelain, silent, inert. But this is where its journey begins. The alchemist, satisfied or perhaps afraid, wraps the spoon in linen and tucks it into a carved wooden box. He does not sell it. He does not gift it. He hides it. Not because it failed, but because he believes it worked. And in a city where betrayal walks hand in hand with power, a spoon that detects poison is not a thing to be sold. It is a thing to be stolen, or worse, used. He will not be the last to touch it. He will not be the first to need it. But in the quiet of that Florentine night, as the fires dim and footsteps echo outside, the spoon rests in darkness, waiting for its purpose, waiting for its secrets to be whispered, waiting for history to begin watching. The spoon did not stay hidden long. 5 years later, in the winter of 1347, a woman named Allegra di Neri unlocked a drawer her husband had sworn never to open. The room was cold. Her fingers were wrapped in a linen shawl, still stiff from drying by the hearth. Her husband, Giulio, had died 3 days earlier, not by fever, nor blade, nor curse, but by a slow, choking sickness that began with his morning stew and ended before sunset. Giulio had been a man of ambition, not kindness. A clerk to a banker, he knew things others whispered about. He traded in secrets, not coin. His death, some said, was justice. Others called it business. But Allegra, for the first time in a long life of silence, chose not to grieve. She chose to search. And there in the drawer, beneath folded silk and dried lavender, she found the box. It was small, heavy, the kind of object that didn't look valuable, not in a city that bled gold. But when she opened it, something in her chest paused. A spoon, just a spoon, white as milk, thin as air. A soft shimmer ran across its curve, like the afterglow of a storm. There were no instructions, only a slip of parchment, too faded to read. But she knew somehow it wasn't for soup. It wasn't for medicine. It was for truth. Allegra, who had never been allowed to speak too loudly, now held something that listened. She remembered her mother's warnings. The rich do not eat alone, but they die alone. She remembered the way Giulio checked her food first, always. The way his hands trembled when they shared the same plate. The way he never let her pour the wine. She remembered, and she understood. For weeks, she used the spoon only at night, alone, testing it with small drops of her food before eating. At first, she doubted, but then, one night, the spoon shimmered darker, a strange flicker along its bowl after dipping into a pear preserve gifted by a neighbor. She did not eat. The neighbor moved away before spring. In a city preparing unknowingly for plague, Allegra grew quiet and careful. She no longer trusted favors. She no longer feared loneliness. The spoon became her companion, not out of affection, but out of a shared understanding. The world is not kind to the quiet, and poison is rarely loud. One morning, a visitor came. A pale man in blue velvet, carrying a letter sealed with red wax. He said nothing about Giulio's death, only asked if anything had been left behind. He was known to collect delicate things, the man said. Allegra's hand stayed behind her apron, resting on the wooden box inside. She offered him wine, poured it herself, and watched him drink. He left in silence. He did not return. The spoon had changed her. It had not made her powerful, but it had made her aware. She saw things she once ignored, the too warm loaf of bread on the doorstep, the bruise on her maid's wrist, the strange ash in the firewood. It taught her that in a city of secrets, survival is a kind of wisdom, a kind of resistance. Allegra lived another 23 years. Her name never entered the history books. Her portrait was never painted. But in the back of a cabinet, wrapped in linen, she left behind a small porcelain spoon. With it, a note written in the clear hand of a woman who had once tasted danger and decided to live. It said only this: "This does not tell you the truth, but it listens. Listen with it." After Allegra's death, the spoon vanished again. Or perhaps it simply waited. It reappeared nearly 80 years later in the worn satchel of a traveling monk named Brother Anselm. No one knew where he found it. He never said. But when he arrived at the Abbey of St. Telric in the bitter spring of 1429, his satchel carried nothing but a cracked psalter, a coil of beeswax, and that small white spoon. Brother Anselm was strange in gentle ways. He never asked for shelter. He simply arrived and began working, quietly mending cloaks, repairing stone paths, humming to the bees. He did not speak often, but when he did, the novices listened. His voice had the weight of silence. He never touched wine, never touched meat, but he ate every meal at the same stone bench under the walnut tree, alone, always alone. And every evening, just before sundown, he would draw the small porcelain spoon from his robe and dip it into a bowl of something, broth, gruel, berries, and cream, and stare at it for a long moment before he ate. No one questioned him. They thought him eccentric or holy or haunted. Maybe all three, but strange things began to happen around him. The infirmary's broth, often spoiled by morning, never turned when he stirred it. The beehives, once plagued by wax moths, grew strong again. A novice who had taken to stealing ink from the scriptorium found his hands, stained black for days, after dipping bread into Anselm's unattended bowl. A warning, perhaps, or something more. But the strangest thing was this: Brother Anselm never slept, not once in 7 winters. The other monks took shifts during long snowstorms, warming their limbs, resting their backs. Anselm watched the fire. He kept vigil in the bell tower when wolves howled in the dark. He tended to sick animals. He coppered entire psalters by lamplight without a single smudge. When asked, he would smile and say, "I once lost something in sleep. I do not wish to lose again." He died quietly, with his back against the walnut tree and the spoon tucked in his hand. They buried him under the roots, but not before Father Emmerich, the abbot, opened the satchel. Inside was a scroll bound with a thin ribbon, written in a mix of Latin and a strange older tongue. It spoke of a spoon shaped from porcelain and pearl ash, treated with tinctures of moonseed and glasswort. It warned of food that lies and mouths that curse, and it told of an alchemist who died long ago in Florence, cursing his final meal. Father Emmerich burned the scroll, but the spoon he kept, for safekeeping, he said, and for the first time in 30 years the abbot began eating alone. No one knows how the spoon left the abbey, but one night in 1531 it appeared again, this time in the boudoir of Lady Mirabelle of Greystone Hall, nestled among silver combs and perfume flasks. Greystone was a house of masks. The noble women who lived there powdered their faces until they shone like porcelain, and no servant ever saw them without paint. Lady Mirabelle was the youngest and most secretive. She never smiled at court, never laughed. She was said to have married twice and widowed twice before her 19th birthday. The causes were unclear. It was said she had a gift for endings. She ate alone, behind a lace curtain. Her meals were brought in silver trays by mute footmen, and always she used a white spoon, small and round, as delicate as a bird's bone. At night she held salons, not for poets or courtiers, but for mirrors. She collected them obsessively, silvered glass, Venetian bubbles, smoky convexes from Bohemia. They hung from every wall, dozens upon dozens, some full length, some handheld, many cracked. Guests walked through halls of reflections, never knowing which face was theirs. Lady Mirabelle would sip from her silver goblet, nod once, and say only, "Find the one that lies the least." Then the guests would begin the game. Some wept at what they saw in the glass. Others swore they glimpsed themselves aged or dead or grinning with a mouth not their own. The spoon was always there, quietly waiting on a velvet napkin. Then the disappearances began. A scullery maid vanished in her sleep. A painter who had made a miniature of the lady's face disappeared while delivering the finished portrait. A cousin from Canterbury came to stay for a month and was never seen again. No one dared ask Lady Mirabelle. She only said, "Some faces do not reflect. They absorb." One night, when the mirrors were all veiled in mourning cloth, a letter arrived from the Archbishop. A quiet investigation was to be held. The spoon vanished that same night. But in the morning, the footman found Lady Mirabelle dead in her chair. Her face was utterly blank, not pale, not afraid, just erased, as though even her memory had been wiped from her skin. All around her the mirrors cracked, and in the velvet napkin there lay nothing, just a single white hair curled like smoke. The spoon did not reappear for nearly a century. The years between were filled with war and plague, fire and frost. Some claimed the object had fallen into the Thames and been swallowed by mud. Others said it had been stolen by a Romany caravan and buried at a crossroads to trap wandering spirits. But those were only whispers, the kind people tell to make strange things feel less dangerous, less real. In truth, it was waiting, and in the year 1624, the spoon emerged again in the most unremarkable of places, a nameless box in the cellar of an apothecary's shop on the edge of Stillwater Hollow. The shop was carved into the belly of a hill, its doorway low and crooked, marked only by a faded red ribbon above the lintel. The villagers rarely entered, unless absolutely necessary. The man who owned it, Master Clay, had a face like wilted parchment and fingers stained with the juice of every known root. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice came out like dry leaves. But he had a gift for mixing quiet things. Not just remedies for cough or fever, but powders for grief, tinctures for memory, balms for unbearable silence. And something else, something quieter still, a little green bottle that had no label. People only asked for it in hushed tones, the draught for forgetting. No one knew where Master Clay came from. He'd arrived 10 years earlier during a thunderstorm, dragging a wooden chest bound with rusted iron. The villagers heard hammering at night, saw smoke of strange colors rising from the chimney. Chickens refused to walk past his door. He never seemed to age. One day, while searching for dried valerian in the cellar, Master Clay found a small oak box tucked behind a collapsed shelf. Inside, cushioned in decayed silk, was a spoon. It was not like the others on his shelf. This one was pale, bone white, perhaps porcelain, with faint veins running through it like frost on a window pane. When he touched it, the oil of his skin left no mark. It remained cold. He tested it on water. Nothing happened. He tested it on belladonna. Nothing stirred. But when he stirred his draught for forgetting with the white spoon, the mixture changed. The scent of the draught faded. Its color shifted to pearl. And the memories, they didn't just fade, they vanished. One woman came in, crying for the loss of her son. She took the draught, stirred with a spoon, and within minutes she blinked and said, "Who is it I was mourning?" Another man, ravaged by the horrors he'd seen in war, drank the new potion in silence. He smiled afterward, not with peace, but with a hollow stillness, as though the pain had never happened. And yet, some said those who drank from the white-spooned bottle began to change. A widow was found standing in the rain barefoot, unable to recall her name, laughing as though at a joke she couldn't explain. A farmer known for his honesty began to lie compulsively, forgetting which story was true. A child who'd been made to forget her fear of fire was caught walking straight into the hearth. Master Clay watched. He recorded everything, and the more he wrote, the more the spoon began to appear in his dreams. Not resting, but stirring ink, stirring smoke, stirring the very air around his sleeping body. He began to lose time. One day he woke to find he'd sold 30 bottles of the draught though he recalled only 2 visitors. Another day he found words in his ledger. He remember writing entries written in languages he speak, some not even from this world. The final entry in the apothecary's ledger reads, "It does not erase. It replaces. I have not made medicine. I have made hunger." The shop was found empty a month later. The villagers entered hesitantly. The hearth was cold. The shelves were bare. And in the cellar, among shattered jars and broken glass, there lay a single spoon in the dust, untouched by time, glinting in the dark. They sealed the door. They whispered prayers. But in the years that followed, the people of Stillwater Hollow began to forget things. Little things at first, names, directions, birthdays. But then came bigger things, the faces of their parents, the layout of their own homes, the meaning of the church bells, the very reason the village had a name at all. Stillwater Hollow is not on any map now. Only a few remember it ever existed, and those few, they dream of a pale spoon stirring the air, as though searching for its next ingredient. No one quite knows how the spoon traveled from Stillwater Hollow to the northern moors of Lancashire. There were rumors, of course. A band of tinkerers who broke into the abandoned apothecary for supplies, a grieving priest who wandered the region offering forgetfulness in exchange for names, a raven that stole the spoon from a cellar shelf and dropped it through the roof of a carriage full of beeswax. But the most enduring tale, told only in fragmented verses sung by children skipping rope, was this: the candle burns with memory's smoke. A spoon of white will stir what's broke. Forget the name, forget the flame, but light returns and brings the shame. It surfaced next in 1701 in the possession of a candlemaker named Een Moran, a widow with soot-blackened hands and a gaze like cold honey. Her workshop sat on the edge of Blackfen village, beside the marshes where fog moved like a living thing. She was known for making candles that never dripped, never flickered, and sometimes burned with no wick at all. She sold them to those in mourning. The bereaved said her candles gave off a scent like old runes and remembered lullabies. Some claimed that when they burned one, they dreamed of lost loved ones sitting by their bed, whispering unfinished goodbyes. What they didn't know was this: Inez had found the white spoon buried in a barrel of beeswax, hidden beneath hardened yellow slabs like an insect encased in amber. She thought it bone at first, something left from the slaughterhouse, but when she touched it, her fingers went numb. That night she lit a candle and stirred the melting wax with the spoon. Just once, the flame turned pale blue, and from the tip of the wick came the unmistakable scent of cedarwood pipe smoke and ashes, her husband's scent. A scent she hadn't smelled in 11 years. She wept. Then she stirred again. The next candle brought back her sister's laughter. The one after that, the sound of her mother's knitting needles tapping by the fire. The fourth candle, however, was different. It burned the color of bruised skin. Its scent was metallic, iron and smoke and wet earth. It smelled like her father's grave. She tried to stop, but the spoon would not be put down. She found herself waking in the night, stirring wax she had not meant to heat. Her memory grew slippery. Some days she could not recall how many candles she'd sold, or what month it was, or how long ago she'd last eaten. She began to speak to the candles, and, disturbingly, some of them spoke back. Her neighbors noticed flickering shapes in her windows, shadows that did not match her movements, voices that didn't carry from her mouth. One man swore he saw her walking into the marsh one evening while still lighting candles inside the workshop. The final candle she made, the last before the workshop burned, was unlike any other. It was black, utterly black. When it burned, it did not give light. It absorbed it. Those who stood nearby saw things, not with their eyes, but with something older than sight. They remembered events they'd never lived, lives they had never known. A man dropped to his knees and confessed to sins he could not explain. A woman screamed for her baby, though she'd never borne a child. And Inez? She whispered, "The spoon is not a tool, it is a key, and I have opened too many doors." That night, the candle shop caught fire, but the fire had no color. It moved silently, like ink spilled in reverse, crawling up the walls and into the sky. By dawn, there was nothing left but smoke. No body was found, no bones, no melted wax, only a blackened hearth, in the center of which rested a spoon, untouched by flame, impossibly white, and still faintly cold. It would not resurface again for more than a century. By then, the world had changed. The soot-choked skies of the Industrial Revolution had rolled over England, leaving brick scars and iron bones across cities once known only for their forests. But beneath all the smog and steam in the bowels of the Royal Archive of London, where breath turned to fog and the walls smelled of mildew and paper rot, the spoon quietly returned, not with a scream, not with fire. It simply appeared. In drawer No. 43B of the Restricted Curiosities cabinet, a massive iron vault sealed by 6 locks, and forgotten even by most of the senior archivists. The spoon was catalogued under a false name. Object 43B17, ivory stylus, origin unknown, material not ivory, status do not touch, for observation only. The note was unsigned, dated 1813, and for decades no one touched it. That is, until Dr. Aldous Pell, a soft-voiced and soft-shouldered man with thick glasses and thinner nerves, was assigned to review misfiled relics from the early 19th century. He didn't find the spoon. The spoon found him. It began with dreams, not his own, but described in footnotes from archivists long dead. He began noticing strange margins in the backs of books, scribbled in a language that looked suspiciously like Latin, but shifted when stared at too long. He came across a letter written by someone named possibly Inez Morin, describing a white utensil of indelible chill, a bone of thought carved from absence. He became obsessed, and on the 112th day of his search, while inspecting drawer 43B, he found it, a white spoon resting on black velvet, cool to the touch, except No one had opened the drawer, and he hadn't yet unlocked it. The locks were still sealed. From that day forward, Dr. Pell changed. His eyes became slightly misaligned, one always staring a second ahead of the other. He lost all memory of his childhood, though he could recall the migration patterns of extinct birds with sudden clarity. He began filing papers no one could read, in a language that did not match any known script. Co-workers whispered about the odd rhythmic tapping they heard from his office late at night, a sound like a spoon against stone. His journals became erratic. One entry read, "It does not remember as we do. The spoon stores echoes, not facts. It bends grief into objects. It does not feed. It harvests, it waits." Another, "I have stirred nothing. I have stirred everything." Then he vanished. No one knows how. His office was found undisturbed. No sign of a break-in, no blood, no dust out of place. But drawer 43B, empty. All that remained was a smear of wax on the archive floor, and near it, etched into the wood, not carved but scorched, were the words, "You are the drawer now." Some say the spoon is still in the Royal Archive, hiding in plain sight, jumping from drawer to drawer, from hand to hand, rewriting the memories of those who dare to seek it. Others claim it left the archive entirely, that it now exists in stories like this, reshaping itself into the memory of the listener. Like you. There's a village in northern Wales, hidden in the folds of the Cambrian hills, that never appears on maps. It is not abandoned. It is simply left alone. The locals call it Cwm Heb Blant, the valley without children. No one remembers when the name began, only that it is never questioned. And no children have lived there in over 170 years. Not one. The people speak softly. They pad through life as if walking through a dream that isn't theirs. Even the animals are quiet. Sheep that do not bleat, crows that do not caw. And in the home at the edge of the village, beneath ivy-covered stone and ancient slate roofs, lives a woman named Elsbeth who hasn't aged in decades. Her hands are smooth. Her hair remains the color of moonlit salt. She has no children. She speaks of no family, but she keeps a drawer locked at all times, a drawer no one has seen opened. The drawer came with the house, and though she never admits it, Elsbeth dreams in spoon-shaped shadows. It is said the drawer once belonged to a woman named Avis, a wet nurse, who lost 6 children to a bitter winter in the 1600s. In her grief, she carved a spoon from the last bit of firewood she had, not to feed, but to remember. Each night she stirred the air with it, whispering their names, and one morning she was gone. Only the drawer remained, still warm to the touch. The house passed from hand to hand, but always those who kept the drawer lived in houses without laughter, without cries, without childhood. The village changed slowly. Children left and never returned. Pregnancies failed without pain or reason. No one questioned it. No one wrote it down. Even grief itself became quiet. One traveler, a folklorist named Gareth Blyde, once wrote about C.W.M. Heb Blant in a now-banned book of soft curses. He described walking into the village and feeling his memories begin to untangle, as if someone were carefully unspooling his childhood with a soft white spoon. "I wept in the street," he wrote, "but I did not know why. And when I reached the edge of the valley, I had forgotten my own name. Only the color of my mother's dress remained." He never returned. Some say the drawer holds more than a spoon now. It holds the sounds of lost lullabies, the warmth of never-born children, the fading heartbeat of a grief too old for words. Elsbeth sometimes sits beside it at night and hums songs she does not remember learning. And on certain nights when the wind doesn't move and the stars seem to turn their gaze away, she stirs the empty air beside her, gently, as if feeding something that no longer needs to eat. In the southeastern coast of Bretagne, just beyond the cliffs of Finisterre, stood a long, thin house with one crooked window. It was built in 1781 by a man named Ronan Bellamy, a former dentist turned clockmaker, who claimed he could hear the teeth of time grinding in the sky. He wasn't mad, or perhaps he was, but not in the ways you'd expect, because Ronan built his house to catch sound. Not wind, sound. The eaves curled inward, the windows set at irregular angles, the floorboards hollowed beneath the rugs. When people spoke, the words would vanish into the wood. Gone. He kept no clocks in the house. He said they couldn't keep up. Instead, he built chimes, not to hang but to hide. They were placed inside the walls, in the bones of chairs, in the spines of books. When you laughed, the room would remember it and laugh again days later. When you argued, the table would tremble, and when you whispered in the night, the door would open, not close. After Ronan died, the house fell into disrepair, but it never fell silent. Villagers avoided it. They said it whistled through its teeth, especially on nights when no one was there. One visitor, a skeptical priest named Father Marin, spent a single night in the house. He left before dawn, pale and trembling, his mouth stuffed with rags. He never spoke again, but the real strangeness began in 1852, when a traveling tinker stayed the night and claimed to have found something in the attic, a wooden spoon, ordinary in shape, smooth, polished, but carved with tiny lines, dental marks, he said. Not bite marks, more precise, like an impression of the inside of a mouth. Of 100 mouths, he sold it to a collector, and then vanished before the train reached the next station. The collector, a Belgian phonograph engineer named Jules Romain, claimed the spoon had unusual properties. When placed near a recording device, it emitted a low murmur, not of voices, but memories of voices. It was like someone breathing out words that had once been said. Jules built an entire room to contain the spoon, padded, silent, sealed. He called it the acoustic crypt. He made recordings of the spoon's emissions, but they were never the same. Each night, new phrases would appear, most nonsensical. The strawberries aren't ripe, but the mirror is hungry. It tastes like red string. His molars forgot her name. Some sounded like children. others like whispers through old walls. And one night, just once, the spoon said something that made Jules abandon his profession entirely. "You pulled me from the mouth of time." He died of a burst eardrum a year later, in perfect silence. The house was dismantled piece by piece in 1903. Each beam was sold to a different collector, fearing the structure as a whole had memory, but the spoon disappeared again. Some say it returned to a drawer. Others say it dissolved into vapor, having remembered everything it was made to forget. But the house? No one rebuilt on that land. Even now, if you walk the cliffs of Finisterre and whistle, the wind will pause, and you may hear very faintly someone whistling back through gritted teeth. In a crumbling convent in the region of Umbria, Italy, there once lived a girl named Serafina. She arrived at the age of 6, dropped off by a woman with no name, no words, and a tear-streaked face. The girl carried nothing except a half-burnt sketchbook and a string of wooden rosary beads with no cross. She never spoke, but she drew. Oh, how she drew! The nuns believed she was touched by God. They gave her paper, and she gave them visions. Visions of saints and skies, of fire and famine, of animals never seen in this world, and objects that seemed too familiar to be invented, but too strange to be explained. Each morning she'd sit at the long wooden table by the convent's eastern window and sketch furiously, as if catching something before it fled. Her most disturbing drawings were always of one object, a spoon, but not just any spoon. It was warped in shape, curving like a serpent, etched with marks that seemed to shimmer as if moving. Sometimes the spoon had shadows behind it, sometimes faces reflected inside it, always open mouths, always teeth. The nuns grew afraid. One night, a new sister named Benedetta took the drawings to the fire. She burned them, every last one, or so she thought. The next morning, Serafina didn't speak, but she screamed. A long, wordless, endless scream that lasted from matins to vespers. When it ended, the convent's eastern wall had cracked from floor to ceiling, and a single drawing lay on the ground beneath the window. The spoon again, but this time it wasn't being held. It was watching. Over the next year, Serafina's art became stranger. She drew things before they happened. A crow falling dead on the windowsill, Sister Angelica breaking her ankle while washing linen, a cracked jar bleeding something black from the pantry. Each drawing contained the spoon somewhere in the corner, sometimes barely visible, sometimes front and center, but always there. It became clear the spoon was more than a recurring memory. It was a participant. On the feast of St. Agnes, Serafina disappeared. Her bed was untouched. Her rosary was gone. Her last drawing was still damp with ink. It showed the convent's long eastern table, and Serafina sitting at it, alone, drawing. But her face in the image wasn't her own. It was the face of a much older woman, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as if whispering, as if remembering. The convent fell to ruin in the 1930s, but the drawing survived, passed secretly from collector to collector, too afraid to destroy it. In 1984, it appeared in a private exhibit in Marseille under the label Untitled, Artist Unknown. Found object, wooden spoon fragment embedded in paper, because by then something new had happened. The spoon had begun growing out of the paper, not in ink, in wood, like it was being born again through the drawing that remembered it. In the vaulted cellar beneath the University of Leuven, there is a room that does not appear on any map. It lies beyond a false wall, behind a shelf marked Dissertations, 1733 to 1741. You must pull out a blue-bound volume on 18th century tax law, and then a red volume on funeral rites, and then wait. The wall breathes, then opens. Inside, a narrow stone corridor, lined with rusted torch sconces that haven't been lit in centuries, but still smell faintly of smoke. And at the end of the corridor, a single door, black wood, iron latch, and an inscription in Latin scorched into the frame, Oblivisci est mentire. To forget is to lie. The room is lined with drawers, thousands of them, no labels, no keys. But if you touch the right one, if you think the right thought, it slides open. Inside each drawer, a document, a token, a whisper, a truth someone wished the world would never know. This is the confession room, not for public sin, not for absolution, but for secrets so heavy they warped time. The spoon was found in drawer 19,384, wrapped in a vellum scroll tied with human hair. The scroll read, I told them it was just for stirring soup, but I knew it was more. I saw what it did to my mother. I felt it hum when I held it. I buried it under the old house, and still it came back. Not the same one, but close. Every spoon since has whispered to me. This one sang. I burned my kitchen. I burned the field. But it still waited at the table. Now I surrender. Let this object rest with other lies. The archivist, who the archivist was, no one knows. But the ink on the scroll was tested and found to contain blood human, but not matching any known genetic profile. The hair used to tie the scroll, a type of keratin no longer present in modern humans. The spoon itself was catalogued as item 9-1, a could not be photographed, not because it resisted light, but because in every photo something was added, a new shadow, a fourth finger, a letter that wasn't there, always subtle but never benign. After its fifth appearance in unrelated archival images, the spoon was locked inside a sealed drawer, which welded itself shut overnight. They tried to open it with heat. The drawer wept. Tears, real ones, salty, human, warm. The archivist who witnessed this quit that very night. Her resignation note read only, it forgives no one. That room now sleeps. It is never mentioned in student maps. But sometimes, late at night, when the power flickers, librarians say you can hear metal scraping inside the stone corridor. And if you listen closely, you'll hear someone whisper, liar. In the town of Levenham, England, nestled in the crooked-laned heart of Suffolk, There is a ledger dated 1376. It lists names, hundreds of them, some crossed out, some marked with a star. But next to one name, the scribe left no date of birth, no profession, no family crest, only the word, returned. The name is written in red ink, and in the margins someone added, in what appears to be a child's handwriting, the candle went the wrong way. They called it a mourning candle, a funerary tradition mostly forgotten by now. Wax poured in silence, wit braided from the deceased's hair, and burned in their honor for 1 hour after burial. But this one didn't melt downward. It grew taller. With every hour the candle stretched, rising like bone from the grave. The wax thickened instead of thinning. The wick never blackened. The flame never wavered. It was lit at dusk. By dawn, it had doubled in size. By noon, it scraped the rafters of the church. The priest, Father Theobald, wrote a single line in his diary before fleeing the town. I did not bury the dead. The dead buried me. They found his robes on the altar the next morning, still warm. A boy named Lute, 12 years old, missing since spring, walked into town the next night. His feet were muddy. His hands were covered in beeswax. When asked where he'd been, he only said, I followed the light, but it never got smaller. When asked who had lit the candle, he said, it did that itself. It wanted to remember. It wanted someone to come back. When pressed for more, the boy bit his own tongue so hard he bled. He never spoke again. The candle now stands in a crypt beneath St. Mary's Church, encased in glass. Its height, 6 feet, 3 inches. Its color, the pale yellow of old teeth. Its flame, eternal. Local legend says that if you whisper your name into the glass case, the candle will either flicker or flare. If it flickers, you are safe. If it flares, the next morning your name will appear in the 1376 ledger, under the word returned. Some say the candle is not a memorial, but a beacon. Others say it is a wound, a burning question cast in wax. And every time it grows, someone else forgets who they are. The brick was first discovered in 1891 during restoration work at the ruined Carmelite Priory of Home in Northumberland. It had fallen from an archway, not shattered, not chipped, but warm to the touch. It was passed from worker to worker, each remarking on the same thing, its whispering. Most dismissed it as a prank, someone hiding a pipe or speaking through vents. Yet no voice could be matched. The foreman, Henry Vale, kept the brick in his tool satchel for a week, intrigued by the warmth that never faded. Then he heard the voice himself. It did not speak English. It did not speak Latin. It spoke to him and said, "We are still inside." He smashed it with a pickaxe that night. But when he returned the next day, it was whole again, perched on the same ledge it had fallen from. No one touched it after that. Later research revealed the Carmelite monks had constructed a silent cell in the 14th century, a punishment chamber meant not for isolation, but for forced meditation, stone walls embedded with soft clay. And into that clay the monks would whisper their confessions. Then they would cover them with bricks. Each monk carried the burden of memory into the wall and left it there. Over time, the wall became a sponge for guilt. The murmuring brick was one of the oldest still intact. Its mortar was traced back to 1345, but inside the air was somehow new, fresh, living, like a breath held for centuries. Modern tests in the 1960s placed a brick inside a soundproof lab. What the machine captured was not whispering, but weeping. Not one voice, but many. Layered, tangled, echoing through each other like threads of regret. Most were unintelligible, but one repeated phrase stood out. I kept the bread. I kept the bread. I kept the bread, over and over, for 6 full hours. The lab tech who played it back resigned on the spot. When asked why, she said, I didn't hear them. They heard me. Today, the murmuring brick is stored in a sealed vault beneath the British Library. Some say it still gets warm when a liar is near. Others say if you put it to your ear, it will ask you what you've done. But a rare few claim that if you answer, honestly, completely, without fear, the brick will go cold and never speak again. They called it the widow's mirror, though no one quite remembered why. It sat in a stone frame above a hearth in a cottage long since collapsed, its glass never cracking, never gathering dust, despite open windows and broken beams above. The mirror was found in 1812 by a local antiquarian named Lydia Hargrave, who ventured out to sketch ruined homes in the moorland village of Cropwell-on-the-Wold. She had no interest in relics-only atmosphere, but when she saw the mirror still hanging in place, though the wall around it had rotted to lichen and ash, she couldn't look away. It was oval, almost shoulder-wide, and seemed shallow at first, more like polished pewter than glass. Yet when she stepped in front of it, she did not see herself. She saw a woman in a black linen coif, eyes shut, breathing faintly, as if frozen inside a moment. Lydia blinked, moved, touched the glass. Her own reflection flickered briefly, then vanished, replaced again by the strange woman, this time with her eyes open, gazing straight ahead, as if startled awake. Lydia stumbled back and left. She would return the next day with paper, chalk, and her friend Mr. Silas Brett from the village museum. They would attempt to document the mirror properly. But overnight, something changed. That night, Lydia dreamt of the woman, not as a ghost or shadow, but walking slowly through a candlelit room, her room, wearing the same black coif, and whispering as she touched the furniture. My husband, my son, she murmured. They never came home. Lydia awoke with tears in her eyes and no knowledge of why she wept. When she and Silas arrived the next morning, the mirror was different. The glass now showed a second figure beside the woman, a man in chainmail with a bandage around his head, motionless like a painting caught mid-breath. Neither Lydia nor Silas spoke at first. Then Silas whispered. She brought him back. That evening, Lydia borrowed the mirror no easy task, as it was set into the hearth by ancient iron brackets. But somehow it came loose in her hands, like it had been waiting. She set it on her parlor wall and watched it every evening, documenting the changes. Each night, new figures appeared: a child holding a toy soldier, a weaver with burned fingers, a dog with one blind eye. They never moved, only stared out as if paused mid-story. But if Lydia watched long enough, their mouths would open and soundless words would pour out, silent pleas pressed against the barrier of time and glass. It was not until a month later that she noticed her own face in the mirror, but not as a reflection. She was standing behind the others, holding a lantern, her eyes tired and hollow. She had not placed herself there, and yet she watched herself for hours. That same week, her family reported Lydia no longer left her home. The curtains were always drawn, and meals left at her doorstep remained untouched. When her cousin forced the door open in concern, Lydia was gone. No sign of her except her journal open on the final page, where she'd written only, "They needed a witness." The mirror was still there, but the hearth had reformed around it, sealed with stone none could identify. And in the mirror stood the same figures now, including Lydia, reaching out with her hand pressed against the inside of the glass. To this day, the widow's mirror remains sealed in a climate-controlled vault in Wiltshire, guarded not for its value, but because of what it shows. For anyone who stands before it long enough will see a version of themselves, not in the present, not in the past, but in some suspended space between sorrow and silence. Some claim it's a portal to grief unspoken. Others say it is the sum of unfinished stories, waiting for someone kind enough to witness them. But archivists know the truth. Every figure in the mirror was once a viewer. The more you watch, the more you appear. And one day you do not come back. They named it the Black Viaticum Box, though no traveler ever carried it, and no priest would claim to have blessed it. It was discovered in the crypt of a ruined abbey outside Dinmarrow, buried beneath a collapsed altar, sealed in wax, wrapped in crumbling velvet, and bound in 4 clasps of jet-black iron. The abbey itself had burned in 1421, but the box was older perhaps centuries so. It bore no inscriptions, only a faint engraving of a tree with a serpent knotted in its roots. No one could recall its origin, not even the region's oldest monks, whose oral traditions stretched back to the founding of the convent in the 9th century. When unearthed in 1874 by a surveyor named Ambrose Clint, the box was thought to be a portable reliquary, perhaps used to carry the Eucharist to the dying. But when it was opened under lantern light in the cellar of Clint's home, no relic lay within. Only a rolled parchment and a single black feather. The parchment read, "Speak not to the dying, only listen." And beneath the feather, in the corner of the box, was a smear of something old, dried blood, perhaps, or rusted wine. Ambrose kept the box hidden at first, but something strange occurred each time he slept beside it. He would dream not his own dreams, but the final moments of others unknown men and women dying in strange, quiet ways. One night he saw an old woman trying to light a fire with wet wood, coughing blood into her apron as she whispered a lullaby. Another time a boy bleeding in snow, clutching a hawthorn cross to his chest. He tried to convince himself it was guilt or imagination, but each dream left him with knowledge he did not have before, songs in dialects long dead, herbs that grew only on northern cliffs, verses no scripture ever recorded. He began writing them down. By the end of the year, Ambrose had amassed 3 notebooks of departing thoughts, words that came to him while dreaming through the box. He shared them with a small group of antiquarian friends who quickly became obsessed. One man, a bishop's cousin, stole the box for a weekend and claimed to have heard the last confession of a drowned sailor lost in 1120. Another said he watched the fall of a girl from a monastery tower, her hands clasped in prayer, and awoke with bruises around his own wrists. All agreed the box did not contain the dead, it remembered them. When the group began using it in ritual, reading the collected phrases aloud in churches after dark, the dreams changed. No longer passive, no longer distant, the dead began to speak back. "You are listening," one voice rasped in Latin. "Then hear the cost." Soon, one member of the group vanished entirely, his coat found folded at the base of the abbey's ruins. Another fell mute, unable to speak above a whisper until his death years later. Ambrose locked the box in a cedar chest and sank it into the river, praying for silence, but the dreams did not stop. Now he heard weeping every night, not of the dying, but of the already dead. He began to write down not what he heard, but what he begged not to. His final journal entry reads, "They no longer need the box. I have become it." After his death, the cedar chest washed up on the bank downstream, dry inside. The box was still there, but the feather had changed, larger now, darker, damp as if freshly plucked. The parchment had a new message. The listener is gone. You are next. Since then, the black viaticum box has remained untouched in a sealed chamber of the Dunmarrow Historical Archive. Visitors are warned not to knock on its glass case. Some have reported hearing breathing in the corner of the room. Others fall asleep in its presence and wake with unfamiliar memories, lives that were not theirs. It is not a relic. It is not an object. It is a bridge, and one that has no interest in return journeys. For when you carry the last words of the dying, you carry their burden, and eventually you speak not to the dying, but for them. It began with a key, cold to the touch, and shaped like no door it could ever unlock. They called it the hollow tooth, a name found scribbled beside the object in the brittle ledger of a disbanded apothecary guild in Bruges, 1483. Unearthed by a stone cutter restoring the ruins of a merchant's hall, the key was encased in a glass phial filled with clear resin and suspended by threads of black horsehair. No one could identify its material. It was not brass, nor bronze, nor iron. It bore no tarnish, no wear, and shimmered with a faint, unnerving iridescence. Shaped like a molar tooth, hollow through its stem and ridged with root-like etchings, it seemed too precise for any locksmith's hand. but it was heavier than it looked, and when held, it rang faintly, as if vibrating with a note just below hearing. The key was passed from scholar to scholar, each more baffled than the last. No record existed of its maker. No lock could hold it. Yet wherever it traveled, strange things occurred. Tools rusted in drawers, clocks slowed, and dreams turned sour. In 1631, a physician named Eberhard Thun conducted experiments with it in secret. He believed the key was not made to unlock a door but a body, specifically a jaw. He documented 17 patients who, upon hearing the key's faint hum, claimed to feel pain in their teeth, gums, or skull. One man lost all 4 molars overnight. A woman wept blood from her ears while whispering, turn it again." When Thun filed a report to the Faculty of Anatomists in Lübeck, he was dismissed and later institutionalized for attempting to open the head of a mute boy to fit a lock which did not exist. His journals were burned, save for one drawing, a skull, hinged at the back like a box, with the hollow tooth key half inserted beneath the tongue. Centuries later, during wartime inventory of looted items in 1917, the key resurfaced in a crate labeled Unknown Mechanisms. It was found with a cracked jawbone wrapped in silk and tied with a note in Latin, "Only the unspoken can pass." By then, rumors had solidified into legend. They said the key was used by a silent order of monks who believed in unwording, the deliberate removal of language from memory to reach a purer state of thought. Each monk underwent a ritual where the key was pressed under the tongue during a night of fasting. Many never spoke again. A few claimed to hear the language of the dead whispers not with ears, but through bone. These monks called the key dens silens, the silent tooth. They believed that certain sins could not be confessed in words, but only exhaled through the hollows of the skull. The key, they said, could unlock the buried guilt of generations. Today, the hollow tooth rests in a vault beneath the Vienna Museum of Occult Artifacts, in a case lined with lead and myrrh-soaked cloth. The curator reports that its case fogs each night from within, as if something breathes through the glass. Visitors have fainted. One young student woke speaking an extinct dialect of Old Frisian. Another claimed her mouth filled with dust upon reading its name aloud. The key remains untouched now, but the museum received a letter unsigned, scrawled in ink so faint it shimmered only in shadow. It read, "You locked your sorrow in the mouth, but mouths forget. Bone remembers." It came wrapped in waxed linen, bundled tightly like a wound refusing air. No one at the auction knew what it was when it arrived. The catalog simply read, "Lot 131, the Singing Thread." A textile historian unrolled it first, half expecting a tapestry. Instead, out spilled an object no longer than a thumb, a spool of thread, golden red and so finely spun it shimmered like fire in twilight. The thread was tightly wound around a bone spindle avian in shape, delicate and old enough to crumble at the edges. The smell of it wasn't dust or decay, but something floral violet and smoke. The historian, unsure of what she held, lifted the spool to her ear out of instinct. What she heard made her drop it. Not a voice, not a song, something like a child humming slow and tuneless from far beneath the earth. The singing thread is believed to have been woven in 1372 by a widow named Aveline Corbould in the quiet town of Saint Benut du Sioux. Aveline was known for her silks, but her final work was whispered about even in her own time. They said she'd gone blind from grief after losing 3 children to winter fever. She no longer left her cottage. But at night her spinning wheel turned. Light flickered under the door, even as the church bell tolled midnight. Some claimed they heard lullabies in languages no one spoke anymore, drifting from her windows like smoke. After her death, the local priest refused to enter the house. Her loom had stopped. Only a single spool remained, resting beside a cradle with no child inside. The thread could not be pulled loose, nor snapped, nor burned. It sang softly whenever the wind entered the room. Over the centuries, the thread resurfaced again and again each time, bringing sleep or madness. In 1644, a baroness in Brittany sewed a single stitch of it into her veil. She was found days later wandering barefoot, whispering stories of a daughter she'd never birthed. In 1809, a doctor attempted to unwind the thread under sterile conditions. The room chilled instantly. Instruments cracked. The nurse assisting him fell unconscious and awoke with a lullaby etched into her palm backward, as if written from the inside out. The doctor never found where the thread began or ended. He reported that the spool held more thread than physically possible, winding forever inward like a song with no breath. Linguists, poets, even cryptologists tried to decode the hum. Some said it wasn't music at all but memory, a recording not of sound but of sorrow. Aveline, they theorized, had poured her grief into the fibers with each spin of the wheel, binding her children's names into something timeless. Others believed the thread was a curse. To pull it was to unravel part of oneself. A test was done in 1923 by a folklore researcher who clipped just 1 inch of it for study. Her diary stopped the same day. The page was blank, save for a single line, "She still sings when I close my eyes." Today, the singing thread is sealed in a rotating chamber at the Bibliothèque Occulte in Lausanne, behind 6 layers of soundproof glass and surrounded by salt. Visitors report an odd warmth near its case, a faint vibration in their ribs. Some claim they remember lullabies their mothers never sang. Some weep and don't know why. Once a child touched the glass and began humming a tune that made a nun faint. The thread itself glows faintly in moonlight, always pulsing as if it still spins, as if it remembers the cradle, the grief, the names. It was found buried inside the wall of a collapsed monastery in northern Wales, wrapped in layers of vellum, sealed with wax shaped like a rose, and hidden behind what had once been the altar. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple wooden bowl. Carved from dark ash wood, the grain swirled like water frozen mid-storm. But when they lifted it into the light, they saw it wasn't a bowl at all. It was a listening vessel. The inside was coated in thin sheets of tin and copper, overlaid with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of tiny engraved words in Latin, Welsh, and something older, illegible, almost serpentine. The acoustics were perfect, unnaturally so. Even the faintest whisper dropped into it echoed back with strange clarity. They called it the Bowl of Echoes. Legend held that during the 12th century, monks of the lost Cistercian order of Leithfain believed silence was divine, but that divine silence had to be understood, not merely obeyed. They began building vessels not to hold food or water, but to contain sound. This bowl, their final creation, was said to be capable of preserving a voice forever. The monks whispered confessions into it, final words, dreams they feared to write. Some recited ancient prayers that predated Christendom. Others sang lullabies from pagan tribes long since vanished. The bowl remembered all of it. The monastery burned in 1213 under mysterious circumstances. Of the 43 monks, none were found. The only trace left was a melted crucifix embedded into the stone floor, and the bowl, untouched behind the wall, still warm to the touch when it was discovered 7 centuries later. When modern researchers brought it to a sound lab for analysis, they played back the interior resonance. What came through wasn't static. It was language, whispered, intertwined, layered in dozens of tones. Some voices cried, others begged. One voice, clear and distant, said, "I remember you." The audio was sent to linguists across the world. Some recognized fragments of Old Cornish. Others believed they heard a version of Proto-Norse. A scholar of dead languages claimed one segment resembled early Berber dialect, though inverted phonetically. A priest refused to be in the room when it was played, insisting he heard his mother's voice dead for 40 years, reciting a rhyme she never spoke aloud. Then came the incident. A technician left the recording running overnight. He returned the next day to find every piece of equipment in the room fried, blackened with soot. The bowl somehow had moved 6 inches from its position. The cameras showed nothing, but in the final few seconds of the footage before the static cut out, a voice could be heard, deep, rasping, slow. "Stop asking," it said. The bowl now resides under restricted access at the British Acoustic Archive. It is stored in a lead-lined room with no power, no microphones, no windows. And yet, staff still report hearing something near it. The cleaning woman once heard it whisper her daughter's name, though no one else was present. A scholar who tried to translate the engravings on the inside left midway through his work, refusing to explain why. He mailed his notes 3 days later. All they said was, "The bowl does not record, it feeds." The monks may have believed silence was sacred, but perhaps some silences are not empty at all. Perhaps they are listening, waiting, collecting, not for understanding, but for return. And somewhere in the spirals of that bowl, there may be a voice you've forgotten, one that remembers you. It was no larger than a man's thumb, a thin coil of braided silver, dulled with age, looped in a perfect circle, found inside a leather pouch hidden beneath a loose floorboard in a 15th century merchant's home in Bruges. It appeared at first to be nothing more than a ring and ornament, perhaps a forgotten token of love or inheritance. But under candlelight, something strange happened. The inside of the band shimmered with faint etchings, visible only at a certain angle. A map, impossibly small, began to reveal itself. And not just a map, but a moving one. Tiny etched waves shifted. Cities appeared, then faded. One symbol remained constant. A black tree, leafless, burning. They called it the cartographer's loop. In 1476, a man known only as Henricus the Pale was expelled from the Guild of St. Luke for crafting maps that moved. His parchment charts were said to change shape in the hands of those who held them, showing routes that hadn't existed before and paths no one could verify. Merchants claimed his maps led them to entire villages not marked on any record, only for those villages to vanish the next day. One sailor swore he followed Henricus's map to a river that flowed upwards. Another claimed he returned from a trading journey 3 months before he left. When Henricus was interrogated by the city magistrates, he only said this: "Maps are not records of where we've been. They are instructions for what reality allows." He vanished that same night. The room was locked from the inside. The only thing left was a silver loop resting on the windowsill. The object resurfaced in 1681, passed between collectors of arcane instruments. Each owner reported strange dreams, visions of impossible geographies, staircases carved into clouds, seas beneath deserts, cities without roads or doors. One man, a surveyor from Prague, traced the etchings inside the loop and claimed to find an island in the North Sea, not present on any naval chart. He sailed toward its coordinates and was never heard from again. His empty boat washed ashore in Norway 6 weeks later, the silver loop coiled around the mast. In 1832, it was acquired by a blind watchmaker in Antwerp named Lissel Verten. She claimed she could feel the loop changing shape at night, expanding and shrinking like it breathed. She wore it on a chain around her neck and began creating clocks with faces that moved backward or in spirals. Locals said her timepieces whispered. Her shop burned down one winter, taking with it every timepiece she'd made, all except one. And in the gears of that clock, hidden deep in the mechanism, was the cartographer's loop, perfectly intact, cool to the touch. In modern times, the loop is kept in a private collection, never exhibited, its current location unknown. But legends persist. It's said that if you stare into the loop under the light of a waxing crescent moon, you will see where you are meant to go next, a road not on any map, a place you don't yet know you're seeking. But beware, the loop does not show destinations. It shows corrections. You may think you are choosing to go forward, but in truth you may simply be returning. It sat unnoticed for nearly 300 years, wedged behind a rotted beam in the ruins of a monastery library near the French-Spanish border. A single unassuming wooden box, no larger than a loaf of bread, sealed with wax that had long since crumbled into dust. The wood was blackened, not from fire, but something older, as if time itself had darkened it. When the box was opened in 1912 by a team of archaeologists, they found not relics, not scriptures, but a bell, a tiny iron bell. Rough, unpolished, and silent, it had no clapper, nothing to ring it. Yet the moment it was uncovered, each member of the team reported the same sensation, a sharp ringing inside their heads, so piercing and constant they had to abandon the dig. That night, the team's leader, Professor Augustin Vele, dreamt of a garden where sound moved and reverse birds chirped backward, leaves rustled in silence, and a bell tolled before it was struck. They called it the Bell of St. Nullius. Historical records tell of a monk in the 13th century named Brother Thalric, whose writings were banned by the church for being audibly heretical. His chants, when sung aloud, supposedly caused hallucinations, visions of black suns and doorways in the sky. He was confined to silence, but he refused to stop composing. He created what he called inversions, music that when read backward or in mirrored form had entirely different effects. He believed sound was not merely vibration, but a force that could alter the perception of causality. One of his final works, titled Cantus Nullius, the Song of No One, was never performed. Instead, he locked it inside a bell, not on parchment, not in memory, inside. The bell was forged with a hollow core, structured like a labyrinth. Inside that maze was the hema pattern of ridges and shapes meant to be read by the air itself. A song you didn't hear, but remembered. It said Thalric believed that the right person, at the right moment, would hear it not with their ears, but with their choices, as if a decision made today could echo backward and change yesterday. Throughout history, rumors of the bell's effects persisted. In 1666, a small village near the Pyrenees experienced what they called la nuit mute, the mute night. For 12 hours no sound was heard. Dogs barked in silence. Church bells swung without tolling. But witnesses claimed to feel the vibrations inside their bodies. Some wept without knowing why. Others ran into the forest, speaking in riddles. An old shepherd was found whispering Thalric's name to the trees. When Ville's team brought the bell back to Paris, it was placed in a soundproof vault. Yet researchers still reported faint echoes when near it, children crying, footsteps in water, songs no one remembered learning. One acoustician claimed she heard her own voice whispering a secret she had never told anyone. Within months, several members of the team resigned, citing temporal vertigo, a sense that time was unraveling or looping, or both. Today, the bell's location is unknown. It may have been buried, returned to the earth to silence its call. Some say it still rings not in sound, but in coincidence. The moment you pause before a decision for no reason. The déjà vu that feels heavier than it should. The dream that speaks in music you've never heard, but always known. They say the bell of St. Nullius never needed to be rung. It was never meant to call out to others. It was meant to ring within in the exact second you begin to question whether this moment has already happened before. It was found in the back room of a dying apothecary shop in Prague. The shop had been shuttered for years, the glass windows streaked with the stains of time, its shelves still lined with bottles whose labels had faded into whispers. But in a drawer, beneath a false bottom, beneath dried herbs and crumbling ledgers, lay a thing that should not have existed, a compass with no needle. Its case was forged from obsidian and brass, warm to the touch, yet unervingly cold in spirit. Where the needle should have swung, there was only a thin shimmer-like heat in the air, or the flicker of candlelight on water. When held, the shimmer moved, not with magnetic north, but seemingly toward something else, something unknown. Travelers who used it reported arriving not where they planned, but where they needed to be. The compass became known as the Wayfarer's Dial, and its origins are as disputed as its purpose. One theory links it to a forgotten guild of mapmakers who believed that locations had souls, and that the world rearranged itself slightly for those in deep emotional turmoil. Another traces it to the mysterious library of Strav, where a monk in 1623 wrote of an instrument that reads not the earth's pull, but the aching of the heart. In 1794, it surfaced in the hands of a merchant named Elias Rezik, who fled Vienna during the revolts. He claimed the dial led him through forests he didn't recognize, only to arrive at a cottage where his estranged mother, long thought dead, had been living under another name. He had not intended to find her. He had not wanted to. But the compass had insisted. A year later, he was found frozen near the Polish border, clutching the dial, and a torn page from his journal that read, "It doesn't point outward, it remembers." Throughout the 19th century, the compass passed between collectors, wanderers, and seekers. A violinist used it to find an audience that would understand his haunting compositions. He ended up in a forgotten hamlet where the entire population was deaf, yet they stood around him in tears. A widow in mourning followed its pull to an abandoned church where, for 3 nights, the bell rang with the same rhythm as her late husband's heartbeat. A young girl, lost in the woods, was found sleeping soundly beneath a tree that bore a carved name no one could read. In all cases, the compass never pointed to safety, nor danger, nor wealth. It pointed to meaning or perhaps to unresolved memory. Some said it pulled toward grief left unspoken. Others claimed it led toward the version of yourself you had left behind. Those who used it often found something they hadn't expected. Not closure, but transformation, an unraveling, a confrontation with their own reflection in places they didn't know they'd forgotten. In modern times, the compass was last reported in the possession of a reclusive cartographer who mapped emotional landmarks across Europe, places where people had first fallen in love, or where they had changed their minds about dying. He said the compass no longer worked unless held in complete silence under the stars with your eyes closed. Not to follow it, but to ask it a question. What do you seek? What do you regret? Where are you most yourself? They say the wayfarer's dial doesn't take you somewhere new. It takes you somewhere true, and some truths live deeper than any map, in a direction that has no name, only a feeling. In a crumbling manor nestled deep within the Carpathian forests, there existed a mirror known only as the ember glass. It was not hung on a wall nor set in a frame, but encased in a sealed stone cabinet behind rusted iron doors, bound with wax seals and twine that had not been touched in generations. The cabinet bore an inscription in Latin, "Do not ask what you do not wish to carry." The mirror was not large, no wider than a book, but it shimmered even in darkness, its surface veined with faint golden cracks, like the remains of fire long extinguished. Those who glimpsed it swore they saw not their reflection, but a flickering version of themselves, one in motion, pacing behind the glass or standing still in a pose they never struck, as if the mirror reflected not the body, but the soul in motion. The ember glass was first recorded in 1452 by a physician named Tamak Varku, who wrote of a burning glass capable of revealing a person's hidden injuries, not of the flesh, but of the heart and will. One nobleman who looked into it saw his brother, whom he'd betrayed, weeping silently behind the glass. Another saw his own childhood self holding a toy he'd long forgotten, only to wake the next morning unable to speak. A widow placed before it saw her late husband smiling, but not at her, at someone she didn't recognize. The mirror's curse, if it can be called that, was not cruelty. It was truth, not just the truth you feared, but the truth you had buried so deeply you no longer knew it existed. It revealed betrayals you committed without noticing, choices you never made but should have, roads you turned from, people you hurt when you were too young to understand what hurt meant. There were tales of travelers who broke into the manor just to see the mirror, believing it could grant visions, answers, even prophecy. But they often left broken, some unable to stop crying, others oddly silent, their eyes wide as if still watching something they couldn't unsee. One man carved a door into his bedroom wall after his visit, saying the mirror showed him a room he never built but always dreamed of. He was later found dead, facing the door, which had been sealed shut with nails from the inside. By the 1700s, the mirror had vanished from records. The manor burned partially in a lightning storm, and the ember glass was presumed destroyed. But in 1841, a woman named Mirka Kalov, a scholar of forbidden manuscripts, claimed to have seen it in a dream. She described it in perfect detail, including the golden cracks and the chill that leaked from its edges. She said the mirror now lived in memory itself, and those who looked into water, ice, or even highly polished metal while thinking of a great regret might catch a glimmer of it, just a shimmer, a moment. Modern accounts are rare but eerily consistent. A violinist in Oslo reported seeing a version of himself behind a train window that played with his exact gestures, except when he cried. A nurse in Krakow described an old glass panel in the hospital's basement where her reflection appeared old or exhausted, gray-haired and smiling sadly, mouthing words she couldn't hear. And an orphaned child in Moldova claimed her reflection wanted to stay when she turned away from the puddle. Those who believe in the ember glass say it no longer resides in a single object, that it fractured like all things that see too much. Now it appears only to those who need it most, those at a turning point, a moment of sharp internal divergence. It doesn't show the future, it shows the soul's shadow. And whether you run from it or walk toward it is a choice only the real you can make. They say if you ever see your reflection, hesitate while you move. If it blinks too late or looks just slightly sadder, don't to panic. Don't scream. Just whisper gently, "What have I forgotten?" And if it answers, you are no longer alone. There once existed a small bronze figurine known as the Watcher of Hollowford, unearthed by accident in 1723 during the rebuilding of a collapsed stone bridge near a long abandoned hamlet in northern Yorkshire. The workers who found it thought it was nothing more than a child's toy, a squat, humanoid figure no taller than a hand, with exaggerated wide eyes, hands clasped in front of its chest, and a smooth, expressionless mouth. But there was something in the way it stared, calm, expectant, as if listening for something it had once known well. Local records later revealed that Hollowford had been abandoned in the early 1500s following a sudden and total disappearance of its residents. Not a single grave was dug, nor a record of plague or flight written. The village had simply emptied. Yet at the site of each hearth, when excavated centuries later, one item remained untouched. A ring of stones around cold ash and nothing else, except in the home nearest the river, where the watcher sat positioned exactly on the center beam, facing the door, as though it had been waiting. The figurine was taken by a collector named Archibald Greaves, who displayed it on a mantel in his study. Within weeks, visitors began commenting on its uncanny presence. Some avoided looking directly at it. Others felt it, followed them subtly, its wide, unblinking eyes too perfect in their stillness. Greaves himself wrote in his journal, "I sometimes feel as though it listens when I speak, like a priest in eternal silence. When I turn out the lamps, I find myself nodding to it out of courtesy, as if it deserves acknowledgement." Over the decades, stories grew around the Watcher. It was said to bring calm to some and sleeplessness to others. Those who confided secrets in its presence claimed to feel lighter afterward, unburdened. But there were darker tales as well. A maid claimed to have heard it sigh in the night. A child in the household once asked, innocently, "Why does the little man whisper when no one's talking?" And one guest, a poet, destroyed an entire manuscript after spending a night in the study, declaring he knows the truth of it. The lies aren't safe near him. By 1794, Greaves had locked the figurine in a small wooden chest and placed it beneath the floorboards, writing, "I fear it's not what it seems. It may not be watching at all. It may be remembering." When the estate changed hands, the new owners found the chest and passed it to a traveling historian named Mildred Rye. She studied the figurine closely and discovered a strange set of markings, hidden beneath its base runes not of Norse or Saxon origin, but older and unknown. She began calling it the listener, believing it was meant not to ward off evil, but to record it. She theorized that the figure was a vessel, silently absorbing the confessions, guilt, and private fears of those around it. Not maliciously, but dutifully, like an eternal witness to human frailty. Mildred took it with her on a long sea voyage in 1801. Her final diary entry before the ship sank simply read, "The watcher remembers the river. He's listening for home." Since then, the figurine has surfaced sporadically in estate sales, dusty trunks, and abandoned libraries. Wherever it appears, it is always found facing east toward the sunrise, and always discovered by someone going through a moment of hidden grief. A widower sorting through his wife's books, a librarian cleaning out a forgotten storage room, a child digging through the attic of a house no one had lived in for 30 years. They say if you speak to the watcher in the dark, it will not answer. But if you listen, truly listen, you may feel your own voice echoed back at you, not aloud, but within, a whisper of something you didn't know you needed to say. And if you ever feel watched while confessing a thought you never dared to admit, don't be afraid. It's only the watcher keeping its promise to remember, not to judge, not to speak, only to carry the weight until you are ready to let it go. In the mountain town of Grindelwald, nestled between brooding pine forests and the forgotten trade paths of the northern marshes, there exists an object once known only as the Mirror of 9 Winters. Not a mirror in the traditional sense. There was no glass, no silver backing, and no ornate frame. It was instead a square of polished obsidian, so dark and so deeply reflective that to look into it was to feel yourself falling backward through time. It was mounted within a heavy iron stand that could not be removed from the stone chamber in which it was discovered, as if the mirror and the room were one and the same. According to the earliest written records, dating to the reign of King Aldrich in the 1200s, the mirror had been buried beneath a monastery that itself was constructed atop an older, pagan stone circle. Monks who stumbled upon the chamber during the rebuilding of the cloister reported feeling a cold, not of weather, but of memory seeping through the flagstones. The chamber held no symbols, no inscriptions, only the mirror, standing silently in the center of the room, angled slightly toward the entrance, as though it had been expecting someone for a very long time. The abbot at the time, Brother Fallon, ordered it to be covered, but curious novices snuck in late at night to gaze into it. Some saw only their reflections. Others reported stranger visions, a child version of themselves crying silently, a loved one long dead, reaching toward them from the black surface, or a forest path they'd never walked but somehow recognized. One young monk stared into the mirror for 3 full nights without sleep, refusing food or water. When they finally pulled him away, he was weeping softly and whispered, "She forgave me." I saw her mouth the words. He died peacefully 2 days later. After a year, the monastery closed the chamber and bricked it over. But in 1624, during the plague fires that swept through Grindelwald, townsfolk took refuge in the monastery ruins. A child named Lina uncovered the chamber while playing, her laughter echoing strangely in the empty halls. She vanished that same afternoon. Her father, desperate, broke into the sealed room and found her asleep before the mirror, curled like an infant, smiling faintly in her dreams. He claimed she told him the snow was speaking to her from the other side. By the 1700s, the chamber was rediscovered and declared a site of deep emotional disturbance by natural philosophers. Visitors were allowed inside under strict supervision. They entered alone, one at a time. Each person's account was different. A farmer claimed he saw all 9 of his children, grown and standing before him, though 2 of them had not yet been born. A widow claimed she saw her husband a final time, sitting at their wedding table, mouthing words she could no longer remember. And one woman, a midwife from Wesselbrook, reported seeing herself, not as she was, but as she might have been, had she taken a different path. She wept, not out of regret, but out of the strange relief of knowing that both versions of her had loved and been loved. Then, in the winter of 1813, a fire swept through the town. The monastery ruins collapsed. When they were cleared, the chamber beneath remained untouched, and the mirror stood unscathed, its surface blacker than the soot around it. That year it began to snow in Grenswald and did not stop for 9 winters. Crops failed. Wolves came down from the ridges. The town nearly emptied. Some blamed the mirror. Others believed it was preserving them, trapping the harshness of fate behind its surface so they could survive the storm. Today the mirror of 9 winters remains where it always has, watched over by a solitary caretaker who speaks little and sleeps beside it, as though guarding not the mirror, but the memories within it. Some say the obsidian is not a reflection of what is, but of what was denied, a repository of the moments we refused, the roads we left unexplored, the kindnesses we failed to give. And if you enter that chamber and gaze into its surface long enough, you may not see your face at all. You may see someone waiting, not a stranger, but the version of you that winter forgot and memory refused to bury. In the secluded hamlet of Tharnbrook, there exists a lantern that has not been lit in over 300 years, yet whose glow is said to return every 3rd blue moon. The villagers call it the lantern of the absent guest. It hangs, rusted and unmoving, from the low wooden beam of what used to be the Weary Mar Inn, an establishment long since abandoned, its walls bowed and its windows blind with dust. Travelers who pass through Tharnbrook often miss the place entirely, but those who stay long enough eventually hear whispers about the lantern and the room it once lit. The legend begins in the year 1496, on a rain-drenched autumn evening. The Weary Mar, then bustling with riders and traders, prepared for a great feast. The innkeeper, Harwin Drell, had sent out invitations, handwritten and sealed in wax, not to nobles or lords, but to those who had once shared the firelight of the inn with him during a hard winter 20 years earlier. It was a gesture of thanks, a gathering of old friends and grateful strangers who had weathered a famine together, sharing bread and song while snow sealed the world outside. 10 guests were invited. 9 arrived. The 10th, a cloaked man known only as the musician, never appeared. Yet Harwin insisted a place be set for him. A single lantern, brass-framed, etched with rose thorns, was lit above his chair. It was brighter than all the others, and burned with a strange blue-gold flame that shimmered like starlight caught in water. As the meal went on, guests remarked that the light made the wine taste sweeter, the fire feel warmer, and the air heavier with memory. As midnight approached, the musician's seat remained empty. Then came a knock at the door, not hurried, not loud. Harwin opened it to a moonless night and no one standing outside. But the lantern above the empty seat flickered wildly, then steadied. Harwin smiled, nodded, and returned to his place without a word. The guests continued their toasts, though a chill had entered the room. Some claimed they heard soft music drifting down the stair strings plucked gently, like breath on a harp. When dawn broke, the lantern's flame vanished. The musician's plate was clean. His cup was empty, and a single silver coin, stamped with a symbol none could recognize, sat beside his fork. From that day forward, every third blue moon, the lantern above that chair glowed on its own. No fire lit it, no hand touched it. It simply flared to life at sunset and went out at dawn. Over the centuries, the inn fell into disuse. Harwin died in his sleep beside the hearth. The guests grew old and scattered, but the lantern remained. Even when the wood beam rotted and had to be replaced, the villagers refused to move the lantern. They rebuilt the beam around it, leaving the rusted iron hook untouched. Children dared one another to approach it on the nights it shone. One boy claimed he heard soft violin music the moment he stepped beneath it. Another girl ran home in tears, saying someone whispered her name from inside the light. As the village dwindled and the modern world encroached, the legend only grew quieter, deeper, more personal. A widow left a letter under the lantern, and the next morning the ink had vanished from the page, though the parchment was still dry. A soldier home from war stood beneath it and wept, then left his medal hanging beside the flame. It stayed there until the next moonrise, then disappeared. Today the weary moray stands with its roof half collapsed, and ivy curling through the windows like fingers seeking warmth. The chair once reserved for the musician is gone, but the hook and the lantern remain. Locals still mark the calendar for the third blue moon. They say it's not just a ghost story, it's a ritual, a quiet pact between memory and absence, between keeping a place ready and accepting that some guests arrive by means we do not understand. And if you stand beneath the lantern on the night it glows and whisper a name, any name, you may feel the weight of someone standing just behind you. Not threatening, not strange, simply ... expected. In the damp archives of a crumbling priory just outside Gressley, there once rested a peculiar relic, a book that could not be read unless you were alone and entirely silent. The monks called it the Whisper Codex, though no one could say where it came from or who had written it. Its binding was a strange, oil-dark leather that shimmered faintly in candlelight. Its pages, thin as dragonfly wings, were blank to most eyes. Yet every few decades, someone always alone, always at dusk, would open the codex and find it full of words that felt as though they had been written only for them. The earliest record of the Whisper Codex comes from 1371, in the diary of Brother Elric, a scribe of quiet temperament, who tended the priory's dying gardens. He wrote of discovering the codex behind a loose stone in the oldest chapel wall, wrapped in spider silk and red wool. That night, unable to sleep, he opened it beside a flickering lamp and found his mother's lullaby written across the first page, though she had died before he took his vows and never learned to write. Each page he turned whispered memories he hadn't thought of in years. The smell of rosemary bread in winter, the pattern of frost on his childhood window, the last time he laughed before silence became his life's vow. He told no one, not because he feared mockery, but because some things are too gentle to be shared aloud. Over the years, others came to the codex the same way, not through curiosity, but through aching solitude. A young novice who had lost her brother to fever opened it and found a letter written in his hand, dated the morning he died. A dying abbot claimed he'd read the ending to a sermon he had never dared give, written in perfect Latin across 2 glowing pages. And once a blind monk said he opened the codex and felt the words with his fingers, as though the paper had grown soft ridges of meaning only he could trace. But the codex could never be forced open. If 2 people were present, the pages remained blank. If you spoke, even in a whisper, the letters vanished like breath on glass. One monk tried to copy the pages while reading them, but the moment his quill touched parchment, the codex went cold and empty. The ink in his own inkwell froze. As the years passed, the priory fell into disrepair. The outer buildings were reclaimed by ivy and rain. The chapel collapsed one spring, and with it, the room where the codex had once lived. But the book did not disappear. A traveler from the north claimed to find it wrapped in moss near a stream, untouched by mud or water. He brought it to the cathedral in Lothwin, where it was placed under glass. For a century it sat in a gilded display case, admired and useless. No one could read it. The glass itself seemed to dim when anyone spoke near it. Then one stormy night, the cathedral was struck by lightning. Fires consumed the west wing. In the morning, the case was cracked, and the codex was gone. All that remained was a single slip of paper on the floor beside it. On it was written in soft gray ink, "I was only ever meant to be borrowed." Since then, the Whisper Codex has appeared in unexpected places. A shepherd found it beside a newborn lamb. A widow discovered it in a drawer that had always been locked. A prisoner claimed it appeared on the floor of his cell after he had spent a full year without speaking. None kept it. Each said the same thing. When they no longer needed it, it simply wasn't there the next morning. Some say the codex is alive, that it finds those who are so quiet the world has forgotten them. Others believe it is a relic of some ancient order, a spell cast in ink and silence. But there are those who believe something even stranger, that the Codex does not write the past, but gently rewrites the present, that it gives the lonely a thread to hold in the dark, stitching their memory into something softer. Today, if you find yourself in an unfamiliar room and you are truly, deeply alone, you might notice something heavy and warm resting in your lap. You may not remember picking it up. You may not recognize the cover. But if you open it and say nothing, you just might read something you've never told a soul but always needed to hear. They called her the Candle Singer of Eldmere, but no one knew her real name. Not even the people of Eldmere, the small hill village she passed through only once each year always, on the night of the first frost. She came wrapped in layers of plum-colored wool and worn velvet, her fingers stained with wax, her voice barely above a hush. Children would spot her from the edge of the woods, always walking slowly, always carrying a box of strange, narrow candles that shimmered faintly with movement, like there were shadows trapped inside the wax, waiting to dance free. The villagers never asked where she came from. There was a quiet rule in Eldmere. When someone appears as if from a dream, you don't question the dream, you listen. And so each year, just after sundown, they gathered in the town square, where the woman would set down her little wooden stool, place her box beside her, and light a single candle from the flame in her gloved hand. She would sing, but not songs of joy or sorrow, no ballads, no verses. Her voice didn't follow melody so much as memory. It was said that when she sang, people remembered things they hadn't lived. A woman who had never left the valley recalled the taste of oranges beside a salt, bright sea. A boy who had never known his father suddenly wept as if saying goodbye to him. An old widower clutched his chest as her voice stirred a scent he had forgotten. His wife's hair after the first rain of autumn. Each candle she lit seemed to burn not with fire, but with fragments, glimpses of something just beyond the veil of now. The flames curled in impossible colors, sea glass green, lunar blue, ash gold, and for as long as the candle lasted, her voice filled the cold air, like breath from an older world. After the last flame died, she would leave. No farewell, no eye contact. She never accepted coin, though one year someone tried to press silver into her hand. She paused, pressed a candle into theirs instead, and said only, "This one is yours. Keep it dry. Keep it near." The candle was never lit. Years passed. Winters came and went. The candle singer returned without fail each first frost. Some years her face looked younger, others older. One year she limped and her shawl was torn. Another she brought candles shaped like wings or hearts or keys. But her song never changed. It was never a song. It was the sound of remembering something you've never quite forgotten. Then came the year she did not return. Eldmere waited. First frost came, then snowfall. The square remained empty. Some whispered she had passed into the forest and become part of it. Others believed she had simply fulfilled her task, though no one could say what that task had been. But no one lit her candles. Those who still had one kept them on mantels, tucked in drawers, resting beside dried lavender or old letters. They dared not strike them, not out of fear, but respect, because somehow each candle still seemed alive. And then, 5 winters later, the oldest woman in the village, Myra of the mill house, died in her sleep. As her daughter cleaned the room, she found a candle sitting on the windowsill. Dusty, untouched, wrapped in purple ribbon. She lit it just once. All of Eldmere said the same thing later. They heard a single note echo through the hills that morning. It wasn't music. It was something deeper, something warm, something like a voice welcoming someone home. Today, if you ever find a candle with wax that glints strangely in the light, and you swear you hear a hum when you hold it close, don't light it just yet. Wait until frost kisses the window pane. Make sure you're somewhere quiet, somewhere you can remember. And if you hear a voice that feels older than time, don't be afraid. You are not being haunted. You are being remembered. In the crumbling coastal town of Brynwall, where gulls screamed like old ghosts and the sea whispered secrets in a language only the wind could understand, there existed a thing so unremarkable, so plainly absurd that no one thought to destroy it. A chair nailed to the cliff, not a throne, not a monument, a chair. A simple 3-legged wooden chair tilted forward, its 4th leg forever missing. It had been there longer than anyone could remember, perched on the edge of the gray sandstone bluff, where the ocean met the sky in bruised blue fury. The people called it the Weatherer's Seat. No one built it, no one claimed it, and no one sat in it. That was the rule, spoken softly, half-jokingly, but never broken. You don't sit in the Weatherer's Seat unless the sea has something to say. The old fishermen muttered as they hauled in nets empty of fish. Children dared each other to touch it, and some did just a fingertip to the worn edge of the seat, then a squeal and a sprint back to safety. But even the boldest never sat. The chair itself should not have survived. Storms that tore shingles from roofs and boats from moorings left the chair untouched. One year a lightning strike shattered the tree beside it into splinters, yet the chair stood, salt-kissed and patient. Moss grew up one leg. Rust crept along the nails, but it never fell. And then one autumn, unlike any other, the ocean stopped. Not visibly, no. It still rolled and swelled, white-tipped and restless, but it fell silent. No crash, no hiss, no moaning wind. The harbor bells hung still in the air, even in gusts. The gulls went mute, and that night in Brynwall, everyone dreamed of the sea, but not water. They dreamed of depth, pressure, darkness, eyes too big and mouths too wide, things looking up from below. That morning, they found the Weatherer's Seat shifted. Not much, just a few inches closer to the cliff's edge. The villagers said nothing, but the unease spread like mildew. By the week's end, someone had carved a small mark into the wood, a spiral, no one knew who. And each day after, another mark appeared, a wave, an eye, a pair of hands. Finally, a man named Aldrich, who had lost his son to the sea years before, broke the silence. "I'm going to sit," he said. They tried to stop him, but not too hard. Some wanted to know what the sea had to say. He walked up the cliff path alone. Clouds crowded the sky like heavy drapes. The wind howled again for the first time in weeks, but not at him. It sounded more like breathing, slow, expectant. He sat. No one knows how long he was up there. An hour? A night? But when he returned, something had changed. He looked the same, but his voice quieter, slower, like it was echoing from a cave-held weight. "It remembers," he said simply. "It's not angry, but it's waiting." He never explained, just packed a small bag and left town. Others followed in the months after, especially those who had lost someone to the water. Each time they climbed the cliff alone, sat in the crooked chair, and descended looking different, calmer, distant. Some spoke of dreams, some never spoke again, and some never came back. The weather's seat still stands today, now sealed off by rope and warning signs that flap uselessly in the gale. Tourists ask about it and get vague stories. Just an old chair, nothing to see. But if you stay the night in Brynwall and sleep near an open window, you might hear something soft and deep, like a song sung through water, or the hum of 1,000 old oars rowing beneath the sea. And if you dream of a spiral carved in dark wood, of sitting without falling, of weightless silence and salt in your lungs, remember this. Not all chairs are made for resting. Some are made for listening. In the village of Elbridge, nestled between brooding woods and moaning marshland, there once existed a room known only as the dust chamber. No one remembered when it was first named that, or even when it was last used. It wasn't a room in any public building or estate. It was found in the back of an old cottage, built half into the hillside, long since abandoned. The cottage itself was nothing, a slumping roof, ivy-covered windows, and a door that shrieked on its hinges. But the back room was different. It was always dry, always warm, and filled with dust, so fine it floated in the air like fog, clinging to eyelashes, nestling in the folds of skin, drifting endlessly as though it were breathing. The dust chamber had no windows, only a skylight, forever fogged over with old ash or age-old condensation. Light poured in only in late afternoon, golden and heavy, illuminating the floating particles in a way that made time feel dot, 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 paused. And in the middle of the room, atop a three-legged table that didn't rock or creak, sat a bell jar. Beneath it, a single glove, not a pair, just one, made of deep red wool, worn at the thumb and fingertip. It never moved, but the dust never gathered on it. Everything else, the table, the jar, even the inside of the glass, was thick with it, but not the glove. The villagers spoke little of the room. Some said it was part of the old war effort, used by spies or smugglers. Others believed it had belonged to a weaver who went mad from the sound of her own loom. But the oldest among them said the dust chamber wasn't built, but found unearthed when the cottage was first raised. a relic of something older than Elbridge itself. "The room listens," they'd whisper, eyes narrowed. "It stores," and they were right, for the dust chamber had a purpose. It remembered, not in the way a journal remembers or a song. It remembered physically. If you sat in the room long enough, just long enough for the dust to cling to your thoughts, you would feel it begin. The air would grow heavy, not stifling, but dense, as though breathing through velvet. The silence would change. It wouldn't grow louder exactly, but closer, like the quiet was pressing against your ears. And then the glove would twitch. Just once, that's all it took. A flicker, a flex. And what you were remembering became remembered by the room. Your grief, your guilt, your most hidden ache. It would lift from your chest like steam from warm earth and settle, unseen, into the dust. And the room would hold it forever. Those who left the dust chamber felt lighter, unburdened, but not relieved, because the room had not healed them. It had simply taken what they couldn't carry. Some returned, again and again, becoming paler, quieter, more like shadows than people. And one day they would stop returning, not because they had had enough, but because the room had taken too much. There was one visitor, though, whose story remained. Her name was Willa Brandt, a healer. She believed that memories could become poison if sealed too tightly. She entered the dust chamber not to forget, but to understand what it kept. She stayed for hours, sketching the glove, touching the glass, whispering to the dust. And then she vanished. No one saw her leave. No body was found. But days later, a second glove appeared beneath the jar, not matching the first, different, black, leather, a man's glove. No one knows who it belonged to. The chamber remains, warded, sealed, ignored. But sometimes when the sun hits the hill just right, the cottage glows faintly. And if you press your ear to the dry wood of its frame, you might hear whispers. Not words, but sighs, the echo of a burden handed over. The sound of thoughts turning to dust. And in the attic of the local chapel, locked in a drawer beneath a broken hymnal, lies a letter Willa once wrote, unfinished, and never sent. It reads, "There is a place that does not forget, but it does not forgive either. It keeps what we cannot until we no longer know what we are without it. Beware the silence. It is full." Crows watched like sentinels from skeletal trees. There stood a structure no one built and no one claimed. The locals called it the listening chair. It wasn't a grand object, just a wooden armchair with a crooked back and velvet, so faded it looked gray in daylight. Yet no one ever dared move it, not because it was nailed to the ground or cursed by some known lore, but because somehow it felt aware, as though it was not merely placed there, but waiting. The chair faced the wind, always. No matter how storms shifted or seasons turned, it never spun or leaned. And though children sometimes dared one another to touch it, to sit in it for just a moment, none ever made it past the reach of its shadow. There was something in the stillness of the air around it that halted breath and slowed time. Even the birds refused to perch on its back. They said the chair listened too well. But once, many years ago, someone did sit in it. His name was Halwyn Merle, a widowed man whose grief had turned him mute. He would write, nod, gesture, but his voice, once deep and filled with story, vanished like mist at sunrise. The villagers pitied him, but they also kept their distance. It's hard to be near someone whose silence feels contagious. One dusk, when the crows circled low and the wind ran soft like silk through the wheat, Halwyn wandered to the field. Some say he was sleepwalking. Others believe the chair called to him. He walked barefoot, slow but steady, toward the far edge, where the chair waited like an old friend. And he sat. Nothing happened at first, not visibly, but the wind changed. It paused, not died down, but held its breath. And then the trees around the field began to lean inward, as if trying to hear. Halwyn remained still, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Witnesses, though none admit to standing too close, said the air shimmered around him, that a faint hum began, low and mournful, like the bottom note of a cello played from beneath the earth. And then he began to speak, not loudly, not to the onlookers, but softly, rhythmically, as though reciting a poem. His lips moved gently, his eyes half-lidded, not seeing but remembering. And from what little could be heard, it wasn't his own story he was telling. He spoke of people who were not his kin, of women with white hair weaving sunbeams into rope, of a boy who could speak to insects, of a tower made entirely of timepieces where no time ever passed. Strange tales, beautiful and sad, like dreams retold by firelight. And then, as quickly as it began, he stopped. The wind returned. The crows flew higher. Halwyn stood and walked back toward the village, calm and expressionless. He never spoke again. But the stories, those strange, whispering fables, began to appear, scribbled on scraps of parchment, left in window sills, nailed to fence posts, carved into the bark of trees, always unsigned, always a new story. They were never the same. The villagers began to suspect that the chair had not taken Halwyn's voice, but had borrowed it. Today, the chair remains, weathered, unmoved, and while many have stood before it, arms crossed and eyes skeptical, none have dared sit since. The grass around it never grows tall, but never dies. The wind always wraps around it like a shawl, and if you visit on a particularly quiet day, with no birds, no breeze, no breath of sound, you might just hear a whisper, not in your ear, but in your chest, a story not your own, one that has waited centuries to be told.